Very much, Michael, for that introduction. Hello and welcome, everybody. I can see there are a number of people here. I can't see your faces. It would be really nice if you can put in the Q&A maybe your first name, where you're based, or something about maybe your sector or employment, and we'll get a handle on who's present at the moment. It would be useful. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and I'll start the presentation. As Michael mentioned, I'm discussing community-based education, particularly in relation to place-based climate action and biodiversity initiatives. I'm based in the School of Natural Sciences here in Trinity College, Dublin, and my home discipline is geology. So what I'm going to do is go through an education project I've been involved in the last few years. And it's something which is called IKC3, which is Ireland's Knowledge Centre for Carbon, Climate and Community Action. So the three C's are carbon, climate and community. And this is a project which is funded through the Higher Education Authority through something called HCI, which is the Human Capital Initiative. It's Pillar 3. And at the core of the project really is this grand sustainability challenge that we all face in society. And it's something I thought was very applicable to this seminar series or this webinar series. So for us within the project, IKC3, we're a bunch of academics. We're represented by Trinity College Dublin, University College Dublin, and Munster Technological University, the Tralee campus. And we have a whole host of enterprise partners and community partners. And the overarching challenge that we've identified is really this grand sustainability challenge around how do we halve emissions by 2030 and get to net zero by 2050? Maybe the skeptics amongst you would say it's impossible, but we're still going to try. And we're approaching this really from an education, higher and further education and a training perspective. So something we're really fond of within IKC3 is systems thinking. And I'll explain in a few minutes what that is, but basically it's looking at the bigger picture. It's looking at the whole complex challenge rather than focusing on one small little attribute of that. So we like to embed systems thinking and the systems approach in everything that we do in the project. And this infographic here is really just highlighting that the reason why I asked you about your sector and maybe your employment area or your educational background is to highlight that this grand challenge applies to all parts of society. And for us, we need to work with all parts of society in order to realize our goals. So we're working with government in Ireland and internationally, and we're working with learners, students. They could be learners who are returning to education and maybe still in the workplace. We're focused on the economy and the environment. We believe that you can have a prosperous economy, a prosperous business, and still respect the natural environment and do some good for the environment. We've had so many discussions around things like, overconsumption and human behavior and capitalist economies and how these things can negatively affect the natural environment sometimes, and trying to introduce kind of alternative models of operation. The focus of this presentation really is on communities and society, and that's something I'm going to highlight several times. So, just to say at the outset of this presentation that we're really fond of systems thinking, and we like to embed a systems approach in everything that we do. A little bit of background about the project before I dive into community-based education. IKC3, it's really focused on three individual pillars. So one of these is on lifelong learning programs. These will be things like continuing professional development, and maybe micro-credentials or postgrad diplomas or certificates. The second is something we call experiential learning. And this is learning for the sake of gaining that experience without necessarily getting credit for that in terms of ECTS or qualification, but it's really just to benefit from the learning experience. We also use the experiential learning pillar to experiment a bit and to pilot new initiatives. And if something we see is working really well, then we may try and get this accredited within one of our three or all of three universities. And the focus of the talk I'm giving now is really about community-based education. And this differs somewhat from more conventional modes of higher and further education in that the education initiative takes place within and for the community, as opposed to a university setting. So just to elaborate slightly on that and to explain, maybe these terms are new to you. So lifelong learning programs, I mentioned things like micro-credentials, micro-courses, blended learning. Really, this is around encouraging people in the workforce to return to education. So somebody who has their primary degree, they're in the workplace, and they want to continue this learning throughout their life. It could be for professional development. It could be around pivoting their career. And there could be something like, let's say, AI comes up and they want to learn more about AI and how they can use it within their job. Then this would all come underneath the broad umbrella of lifelong learning. So a nice example of this, something that we're really proud of, within Trinity here, colleagues in the School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences, and specifically the research center, it's called NatPro. You'll see this on the right-hand side of the screen. This is the research center in natural products, and they're part of the IKC3 team here in Trinity College, and they collaborated with Future Learn to produce this MOOC, this massive open online course focused on natural products. So the tagline is harnessing nature's resources for a better world. I've included a QR code, so you might like to scan the code. It'll take you through to the Future Learn site. And this MOOC, it takes place over 3 weeks. It's around 4 hours study per week. It's 100% online. And there's no fee. So you can do it completely for free. And this is because it was funded through the Higher Education Authority through the IKC3 project. So this is an example of one of our lifelong learning programs. Another one I'll just briefly mention here, it's one that's currently running. It's a new micro-credential, and maybe for you, the concept of a micro-credential is quite new. So basically, let's say you're in the workplace and you want to learn something, but you don't have time to do a whole course like a master's or a postgraduate diploma, let's say. You can register for just this learning nugget. They're short courses as a standalone credit, and when they're finished, you actually get ECTS. You get credit for that. This particular one, the Climate Leadership Development Micro-Credential, it's worth 5 ECTS, and we're just about to start the second iteration of this micro-credential, which will start in March, and it'll run for 3 months till the end of May. And actually, applications are open at the moment, so I've included a QR code on the right-hand side, and that'll take you through to the application website, and applications close on the 12th of February. So it's a little under 2 weeks to get your applications in. The first cohort, they're running through the program now, and we have about 80 learners in the program. So it's proven really popular, and the feedback has been great. So if you're interested in developing your leadership skills, particularly in the area of climate, then I'd encourage you to have a look at the website and see if this might be suitable for you. Briefly, the experiential learning programs, I mentioned these earlier. These include things like summer schools. They could be working with enterprise partners around specialized training for their workforce. And just to highlight a couple of examples of these that have taken place within IKC3 over the last few years, the photo on the top right is taken in the old library. I'm sure many people recognize that. And this is a group of around 50, mainly master students from around Europe, some from Ireland, and they were part of 200 students who took part in 4 summer schools dotted around Europe that year. So there was one hosted here in Trinity College, and the focus of that summer school was really around climate innovation. So how can they learn things like systems thinking and systems innovation and apply them to climate challenges and really kind of complement what they're learning within their MSc disciplines around Europe. So it was a really popular summer school. We ran it for a number of years. We did a slightly different version in 2023, which was focused on a smaller cohort, not 200, but just 50. And rather than focus on master's level students, we focused on people in the workforce in Ireland. And one of the outputs which arose from that is shown here. And one of the teams developed this idea around sustainability, STEM education, systems thinking for primary school uh, pupils. And this is something which was eventually produced and is available on RTE Learn. And there's a QR code on the right if you know somebody who might be interested in that. It's a great series. It's really accessible. And it's an example of how, something like an experiential learning program can lead to an output such as this and have really wide impact. So the focus of what I'm, really going to discuss now is community-based education. And you may or may not have heard of this before. It's really around, as I said earlier, education that's based within a community and is for that community. And something as simple as that, if we think about more conventional higher and further education where a student registers for a course and they come to university, really this is flipping that on its head. So rather than have students come to us in the universities, it's the academics go into the community. And there are certain benefits of that, and that's what I'm going to discuss. So if you look at the bottom right, we piloted a community-based education project in the Midlands of Ireland. This was this time last year, and we're replicating that this year. So, what is this all about? Community-based education. I'd say a lot of it is around engagement and partnerships, much more so than conventional university education. So I've summarized it here. It's kind of a loose definition. It's a learning and knowledge transfer strategy. So it's not just necessarily about an exchange from an educator to a group of students, but it's also how this group of learners interact with each other and how knowledge is transferred within that group. And it's something which is, reciprocal and it's two-way. Typically, community-based education is also something that integrates meaningful community engagement with the academic instruction and reflection. And because the learning is taking place within the community, that's something that's quite easily achieved, if things are designed a certain way. So I've highlighted a few things here really, which are key attributes of this kind of approach. I mentioned this knowledge transfer and how the knowledge exchange flows in different ways. And this is something which is really a reciprocal relationship. So it's not just kind of like a one-way knowledge transfer, but everybody concerned who's involved in the program is benefiting somehow. And this includes the people who are delivering it. So for instance, if I go and deliver a community-based education initiative, then I'm learning a lot about that community. I get to really understand the people. I get to understand their learning needs. I'll understand the kind of challenges they're faced with. And then this allows me to better design a curriculum, which is really going to mean something to them. So it's really kind of a win-win situation. I mentioned co-creative and collaborative here. So co-creative is just that. It's creating something together. It's something which can be time consuming to do. It does take longer. However, there are many benefits to that in creating something that's really customized for the learning group and where you get buy-in from that group because they know it's created just for them. Typically, this kind of approach also involves, yes, there's some theoretical knowledge, there's some methodologies and theories, which may be quite abstract, which are taught, but then they're translated in a context where learners get to put them into practice in a very practical way. So they involve things like real-world challenges and integrating the learning objectives with the needs of the community, which is great for community engagement. So I mentioned we ran a pilot project in the Midlands last year. We put out a call in December before last, and we received a number of expressions of interest. And one in particular really stood out to us, and that was from Laois County Council. Maybe there's some people from that local authority here, or perhaps other local authorities. And one of the reasons why we decided to go with Laois County Council as what we called a challenge owner, because they already hit the ground running. They have a lot of initiatives on the go, And they're probably one of, if not the leading local authority in the country in terms of, their progress with climate action planning. So they were great bunch to work with, really enthusiastic. So there are two individuals in the photo here, Suzanne Dempsey and Karen Moore. We worked very closely with them. There is a link to Trinity actually, because both Suzanne and Karen took a postgraduate certificate in climate entrepreneurship. So we already knew each other. They already had training in systems thinking, and they're already very actively involved in climate action within their local community in Portlaoise and the county Laois. So we term them the challenge owner because really they held this challenge of decarbonising the Midlands. It's something which is now part of their, legal remit in that they have to define a decarbonising zone, and they have to come up with a climate action plan, something which aligns with the National Climate Adaptation Framework. And they've defined Portlaoise as a low carbon town as their decarbonising zone. So all of this made a lot of sense to us, particularly in terms of involving the community and a challenge owner in a pilot education program to help them realize their goals. Now, in speaking to the local authority, they did highlight a few additional challenges, which I'd say are common to pretty much all local authorities, in that they highlighted some communication challenges between themselves and the local community. Although they're doing amazing work, they felt that maybe not all of their messaging was getting out there into the community, and not everybody was aware of some of their projects that they were running. Again, like most local authorities, they felt they would benefit from more community engagement and participation, getting more buy-in from the local community, and better visibility of their activities. So in a way, these were kind of like subsidiary challenges, which sat below the overarching challenge of their decarbonising goals for the Midlands. I mentioned, they hit the ground running. A number of existing activities are on the go, including the Portlaoise Low Carbon Town project I mentioned, but also outside of the town, wetland restoration. So we invited Shirley Clerklin to give us a presentation during the program, and she spoke about wetland restoration schemes, and local groups also talking about local biodiversity action plans and involving the community in preserving or restoring biodiversity in the area. So clearly, like a very engaged community, a lot going on, but also quite hungry to know more, which is very interesting. So briefly, just to summarize the approach and the structure, I've mentioned challenge owner already. So we assigned Laois County Council as the challenge owner. Ourselves as academics, we saw ourselves as education facilitators, and I say facilitator rather than provider. Yes, we developed a program, we created kind of a structure or a scaffolding, but we really saw our role as kind of facilitation in that the community already held a lot of knowledge, and it was really to kind of provide a space and an opportunity to share this in a very kind of structured, coherent way. And of course, participants. So what would a community education program be without the community? So Laois County Council recruited around 40 local participants. These are people who were living and or working in the area. They came from a range of different sectoral backgrounds and educational backgrounds. Interestingly, all had a primary degree, although we didn't specify this in our call, but it turned out that everybody who applied had at least a bachelor's, some had masters, and a couple had PhDs. In terms of the structure of the program, we ran this over a 3-month period with a few breaks for Easter and the like, and we divided it into 3 separate phases. So the first phase we called sense making. This was really around making sense of themselves as individuals, as a group, mapping their expertise, their skill sets, maybe also looking at gaps in their knowledge, where they felt that maybe they needed to have more knowledge or more skills. And we also use some of this time to learn about systems thinking, learn about complexity, learn how to deal with uncertainty and decision making, because when we're thinking about future climate scenarios, we don't really know what that holds. We've never really been in this situation before. And there are a lot of uncertainties with trying to figure out what's going to happen in the future, or if you design some kind of intervention, what difference will that make? And could it possibly have a negative unintended consequence, even though you think, you have a particular direction in mind, you want it to go a certain way, but could you inadvertently do some harm by doing this thing? So we spent a month in the sense-making phase, and this was really to get people to kind of stop, look at the bigger picture, take a pause, try and understand this before generating some ideas. And we as people tend to be hardwired to go directly into ideation mode, to think of ideas. If someone says, I've got a challenge, I've got a problem, straight away, automatically we come up with solutions. And this can work well, but with really complex or grand challenges, often this doesn't work so well. So the first part was really to take that pause, try not to think of ideas, but really to understand complexity of the challenge that they're facing in the Midlands, particularly around this decarbonising challenge. Then we went into the ideation, so the mapping the systems, using our knowledge of systems thinking, um, looking at, for instance, energy or transport or tourism or water use or food or whatever was happening in that area. Each of the learner groups decided on a theme. They mapped that theme. They looked at these things called levers of change. And you can think of a lever in a system that if you push on that lever, it can have a cascade effect and it can transform the whole system. So at the end of this stage, the learner groups had developed what we'd call a portfolio of ideas, like a whole range of project ideas, which they packaged together. And then the final phase was really around, how do they articulate their ideas? Who do they communicate to? How do they involve others outside the group? And how do they analyze who can assist them or who might block them or what might assist them or what might block them, maybe in terms of policy or funding? And then finally presenting a concrete plan and their idea. And this was back to the local authority. So it was a very kind of structured program over a 3-month period for all 40 participants. And I suppose at this stage, it might be useful to highlight, what's distinctive about this kind of approach when compared to more conventional higher and further education. It's not to say that a master's course or a bachelor's or a postgraduate diploma or certificate wouldn't use challenge-based learning or systems thinking like many do. But there are several things in particular around community-based education approaches, which I think are quite distinctive. So just to highlight a few things, I mentioned the co-creation approach. If we look at the local authority, for instance, the program, because it was a pilot, was really co-created with the local authority. So we needed to deeply understand their challenge, their decarbonising challenge, their organizational structure, their relationship with the community. And all of this, obviously, it takes time, but it was something that was very beneficial in terms of design or co-design of the program. It helped them to better understand targets or levers within the systems for decarbonizing in the area. But crucially, it also meant that they benefited from community engagement and buy-in ultimately. The community themselves were also involved in designing the plan in terms of the content. So really it was very curiosity driven. So depending on their areas of interest, we could kind of customize some of the content around that. This meant that the learners from the community were very actively involved. They knew that they were actively involved in contributing to the design of the program, which meant, they were really present there and really contributing. And it helped to mobilize their kind of collective or community creativity especially in the ideation phase and coming up with ideas. So I mentioned systems thinking quite a few times. It's a very simple infographic if you've never heard of it. You may think or visualize traditional thinking as more linear, I suppose, that you have a problem A and you provide a solution B. And this can work sometimes, but as I mentioned, with very complex challenges, often this leads to knock-on problems. Whereas systems thinking, it's kind of messy, it's multi-component, It's visualizing the whole system to understand the interdependencies and interactions within the system. I mentioned levers of change, like how do you recognize a good lever in a system? It's really through understanding the complexity in that system. So a lot of the system thinking skills that we taught within the sense-making phase was really to help people to understand the complexity in the local environment of their chosen system, to help them to manage uncertainty in decision-making, to consider possible unintended consequences of any change that they propose to make, and ultimately also, to foster this team collaboration and trying to put all this together. It's something that needs people from very diverse perspectives, education backgrounds, sectors, skill sets. It's not kind of a unique solution for a complex problem, but it's bringing in lots of different perspectives to try and, collectively co-create something which makes sense and will be fit for purpose. So another thing perhaps is the challenge-based learning. And if you haven't come across this before, it's an educational approach which is very effective. And quite often it's something that follows introduction of some theory in that learners will be given a challenge and they apply the theory to try and solve that challenge. So it means it can be visualized in a real world context to real world challenges. For instance, a local challenge within the community. And it's a way that they can effectively kind of hone and use and practice their skills in trying to generate ideas to solve that challenge. And this is something really, apart from systems thinking, that was really at the core of the program. So using both systems thinking approach, but a challenge-based learning methodology. And this has the benefit, I suppose, you could think of learners or students going through different phases using challenge-based learning. So, engaging, starting to develop their ideas, trying to understand uncertainties, investigating, maybe gathering information, interviewing people, taking measurements, looking at data sets, and then putting something into practice. So acting, implementing, evaluating, collecting evidence that their solution's actually going to work, or maybe that it's not going to work, and iterating and trying to develop something that'll work a bit better. Something we did which worked very well within the project is we took advantage of the fact that we had some in-person workshops. The first session of each month was in person as a workshop, and we put it out there to the community members who enrolled in the program. We said, look, if the summer you'd like to go for the workshop, let us know. We can move around the community. Maybe you're working there or you live there, you can give us a tour, particularly in the context of sustainability and climate action. And you can basically showcase some of the activities and introduce us to people outside this cohort. So we moved around quite a bit. We started in the local authority chamber shown on the bottom left. Really amazing place, tiered seating. We felt sometimes we were at the EU Parliament or at one of the COP negotiations, which kind of interjected a great atmosphere to debates and learning. Our second workshop was held in the Portlaoise Irish Prison Service College. Really amazing, state-of-the-art facility. It was a great place, and we also had a tour of the prison and learned about their sustainability initiatives within the prison, which was very interesting. And we held a third workshop at the Laois and Offaly Education Training Board, which is housed at the same grounds as the local GAA centre. And we had a tour of the GAA grounds, and we heard from one of the local groundsmen around some of their biodiversity initiatives and also some of their challenges. So it was great to get, move around the community and get a flavor for the different kinds of activities. But it also helped to kind of promote the program to people who weren't directly involved in the program as learners. So it kind of had this, mushroom effect. It was great. It also allowed us, to interact with different parts of the community and engage with the community, also to better understand some of their challenges, which helps a lot with the sense-making phase. So you may be wondering at this stage, what kind of ideas came out of this community education project. We had several groups. I won't go through all of them, but I'll mention just three here. One of the groups settled on a project idea around active travel within Portlaoise town. And really, it's just something that was designed to accomplish several goals. I mean, part of it was around reducing congestion, particularly in the school run, and people who are living locally and also working locally. So like many Irish towns, there's a one-way system in the main street, and it can often lead to congestion, whereas people, in reality, it's possible to walk from home to school or from home to work. So this idea was really around, reducing congestion, improving air quality, reducing reliance on cars and fossil fuels, but also, the health benefits around being more physically active. And something which came out from interviews with children was that they really wanted to spend more time with their families and their parents. So this was a way they could walk together, they could have a bit of fun, and they could enjoy spending time together as a family. And it's something which actually has been put into practice since this project. Another one highlighted here, focusing on biodiversity and environmental restoration, was on the wetland restoration in the area. There was already a very active community project, the Abbey Leaks Bog project, which some of you may know of. And this was highlighted as an example of good practice. And some ideas arose around, trying to get more people to the wetlands, having more engaged community to better understand environmental challenges, also having areas where tourists would go and go for tours and understand the wetlands restoration and their ecosystem service. And this is historically in an area where large-scale peat extraction had taken place. So it's quite a big, mind shift change going from viewing bogs for extraction of raw materials, so peat for burning for power generation or maybe for horticulture, to view them as, their intrinsic value in nature for drawing down carbon and for, enhancing or creating biodiversity. So that was another project generated by learners. And a third one I'll highlight here was on the creative side. So we had quite a few creative types within the class, and one of the groups settled on an idea involving the Dunamaze Art Centre and really involving others in the community through creative activities and climate action. And that was really amazing to see. So it's just a flavour of some of the project ideas. These were presented back to the local authority. At the end of the programme, we held a summit, and the local authority went on to actually act on some of these projects. So, overall, in terms of the impact, I guess, the local authority gained quite a lot of additional buy-in from the local community. Not to say that they didn't have buy-in before, but it certainly seemed to increase. They had better visibility of their work. They realized in terms of their communication that they needed to adapt this slightly to better communicate the things that they're doing to the local community to improve visibility. And that was certainly a win for the local authority. In terms of, the people who participated in the program, the community, they really did participate not just in the program, but they really went on to put some of these ideas into practice together with the local authority or with other community members. So very much kind of fostering this participatory approach to climate action in Portlaoise and surrounding area. Something unexpected happened at the end of the program. People got on really well. Some people knew each other before they started the program, but many didn't. And we had a really amazing group of 40 professionals who were super motivated, gelled really well together, and made a decision that at the end of the 3 months, they didn't want to go their separate ways, but actually they formed something they called the Portlaoise Climate Alliance, and they joined a network of European climate alliance networks, which are kind of locally based towns, villages around the EU. And they wanted to create kind of a formalized structure to their group, which would leave them in a stronger position to apply for public funding, government grants, and really kind of continue this journey of climate action. Something else which took us by surprise, which was really pleasant surprise, in that one of the members in the group, plus a graphic artist that we had employed who made sketches in every session, they collaborated with a third local artist, and they put on a month-long series of activities in the local library, Portlaoise Library, and they involved something like 11,000 community members over the course of a month. So they integrated the theme of systems thinking. You can see some models here, an iceberg model on the left, and part of a Berkana two-loop model on the right. And these are interpretations of systems thinking templates, which then they made with local school children and local community groups. But it also involved things like using a theme of climate action for their Irish language classes or their knitting group or the kids' arts classes. So over the course of a month in June last year, there were around 11,000 people took part in these activities in the wider community. And that's something when you think about it, it's amazing how you have, a group of 50 people and this whole kind of ripple effect happens through the community and it just grows and grows. And then think about these 11,000 people who went on to then discuss it with others in the surrounding area. So interesting in terms of impact and scaling. Something that happened late last year, back in November, was that we were invited to present this as a case study to a group of local authorities in their annual meeting to discuss climate action. So the theme was a local authority climate forum, Agents for Change, and there were representatives from most, if not all, of the local authorities there that day. I think around 80 staff attended. And it was just a really interesting day of workshops and discussions around climate action, really place-based climate action, and focusing on the remit and the activities of local authorities around Ireland. So we see really good potential in scaling of community-based education programs. When we think about education facilitators, although we started this from our point of view from Trinity College Dublin, they could involve and should involve other higher education institutes. They could also involve education training boards, the climate action regional offices, local education providers, any staff kind of within these roles and within these kind of organizations could be trained to act as education facilitators. And we think about the challenge owners, we have all these local authorities around the country, each of whom are linked within their local community. So we have this really nice template. We've run a pilot. We've shown it can have big impact locally. And not forgetting the policy piece, so it's linked to the climate action plan, the national mitigation and national adaptation framework, and in particular, the remit of the local authorities in defining and delineating these decarbonizing zones. So make no mistake, it's a grand societal challenge. This is a screenshot from a recent newspaper article, and it highlights that Ireland is projected to miss its EU greenhouse gas emission targets by 2030, and there could be huge fines. So this article cites a 20 billion euro fine being imposed on the state for missing these emission reduction targets. So, it's something that needs all sectors, it needs all parts of society. It's not just focused on businesses or local authorities, but it also involves you and me. It involves people. And we need to kind of work together to realize these collective goals. So there are some opportunities. We are looking to scale this community-based education approach in Ireland this year. We are now actively seeking both challenge owners and education facilitators around Ireland. We're actively recruiting at the moment. If you think you might fit the bill for either an education facilitator or a challenge owner, particularly if you're from a local authority, we would love to hear from you. I have an email address there. It's ikc3@tcd.ie. We also have a number of reports available on our IKC3 website. When I looked yesterday, this report wasn't there yet, but you might like to scan the QR code. It'll take you through to the report section of the website. You can bookmark that, and I understand the report will be available there. And this is a PDF basically explaining the methodology and the outcome of that pilot project. So I'll leave it there, but just before I finish, a few thank yous. Obviously, it's not something that I would accomplish all on my own, far from it, but there's a much larger team. In particular, Dr. Helena McMahon at Munster Technological University as project lead for IKC3, Professor Nick Holden in University College Dublin, who's a lead for UCD, and there's a wider team here in Trinity College. in particular, Dr. Subhash Chandra, Rose Dunn, Gail Wiedik, Professor Helen Sheridan, Dr. Gaia Scalabrino, Dr. Maria Piggott, and their amazing colleagues. I have to say, they're open to my daft ideas. They're willing to go with things and experiment and innovate and take a risk, and they're an amazing team to work with. So thank you very much for your attention. I'd love to hear from you. I'm hoping there are some juicy questions coming up and we can have a bit of a discussion. So thank you. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Quentin, for such an insightful presentation. I might just start off maybe the questions, and by all means, anyone who has any questions, feel free to input them into the Q&A segment at the bottom of your screen there. But I think one question that just I'd love to, I suppose, understand a little bit more. Typically, what are the challenges in terms of educators and local communities face in terms of implementing community-based education strategies?
Yeah, it's a good question, Michael. It's something that people may be a bit reluctant to try if they've never tried this before. And I mentioned different strategies for designing curricula, engaging learners, getting buy-in from the local community, recruiting learners and challenge owner. And that's quite different to a conventional class that an academic might teach or be involved in. And that comes with uncertainty itself. And people are generally reluctant to do something where there's a lot of uncertainty. So from an education facilitator point of view, that may seem as quite risky, with a lot of unknowns. And a lot of people would be unwilling to take that on because maybe they feel they don't have the proper background or training to do that and just feel really uncomfortable in trying it. So I'd say give it a go. In particular, if you're interested in this, please reach out to us, because we plan on running a series of train the trainer workshops. And this is something we didn't run this pilot project to tick a box for the project, but we'd really like it if people engage with us and use the methodology and adapt it for their own context. So if you think you might be interested in, from an education point of view, let us know. We will be running these train the trainer workshops, and we'd love to hear from you.
I think we have a question there from Sheila Cannon. So Sheila, if you'd like to go ahead there.
Hey Sheila, how are you?
Good, thanks. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
Perfectly. Yes.
I was just typing the question as well because I was read the question and answer box, but I'll say it. That's maybe easier. Hey, thanks so much for that presentation. Really, really interesting and obviously really impactful. So as a nonprofit scholar, I think of community-based education as engaging with the community sector. So I think in terms of sectors, but it looks like that's quite innovative to collaborate with local authority in order to reach the community.
Yes.
So my experience of community-based is like going directly to local community groups, but obviously that worked out really well, and that's quite new. But I wonder, something that I kind of wrangle with, and I wonder whether you found this at all, that there's a bit of a division between organizing for social purpose and organizing for environmental purpose.
Yeah.
And there's already groups set up in Portlaoise perhaps that are already kind of organized, like the local development company or other existing civil society groups. Were they engaged as participants, or did you find that they engaged with the project so you kind of reached them that way? Or I just wonder how that worked.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things there. One of the reasons why we decided to work with local authorities was that we realized our limitations in that it wasn't feasible for us to go to a community that wasn't known to us and recruit a large group of learners, because we're not trusted partners necessarily within that community. They don't know us and we don't know them. So rather than trying to create a community from scratch to recruit learners into the program, we decided that the best way, kind of the most efficient way, would be to liaise with somebody who was very well known and trusted locally and let them do the recruitment. So initially we reached out to the local authority as a challenge owner to find the challenge or help them to find the challenge. And then they recruited locally within their community. So it wasn't us doing the recruitment. And that was a much kind of more effective way of recruiting this engaged, motivated group of learners. So that's kind of the first part. The second part, yeah, I take your point around environmental and social. One of the key things in the program was that we wanted the learners to think more systemically. So not to see ourselves as something separate to the environment, but part of the environment. And not to think as the environment just for environment's sake, but also about the benefits. So it could be like, economic or tourist benefits. So things like, nature-based solutions, wetland restoration, ecotourism, farming, whatever it may be. So to try and build this greater systemic view of us and our position within the environment and not to see ourselves as separate, because I think this happens a lot. And when there's this split about how we see ourselves as separate to the environment, we don't view the environment in the same way. So I think in terms of environmental protection, if we see ourselves as part of the environment and the environment as part of society, we're more likely to do actions that will protect or enhance that rather than do harm. And that's something that was key in the program. Some of the participants were already active members in some local activities around environment and biodiversity and climate. Most of them were, not all, but some were kind of more curious, I guess. But in addition to that, part of this co-creative environment was to ask the learners, well, who would you like to hear from in your local environment? Have you heard somebody speak before that you think would be great for this group? So they also kind of helped us to co-create the program by inviting in others who are already working in the space locally or regionally. And that was also very useful. So a bit of both, some of them participated, but some also came in to present.
Great, thanks. That's really helpful, Quentin.
Thanks, Sheila, and talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question.
We have another question there just in the chat. Can community groups apply, or is this only local authorities?
Community groups would be delighted to hear from you. Yeah.
Brilliant.
So,
I have another question here. Patricia, you have a question there for ahead.
Hello, hi. Thanks for having me.
hi, Patricia. How are you?
I'm really good. I just caught the end of your talk, and I'm very glad that I did. An old student of yours put me on to this today, Patrick Lamb.
Oh, Patrick, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Patrick and I met through a community initiative launched last year in Tipperary. Actually, 2023 ran into 2024, and it was called Community Climate Coaches. And I was just wondering if there could be any kind of an overlap between the two, because we've had great success, to be honest with you, with 3 of the municipal districts in Tipperary, having co-created a series of meetings where we gather community together. First of all, us gathering was community gathering to learn how to present and to help save our environments and where we are and what we're doing, and everybody to have some joined up thinking. And together with the North and South Tipperary Development Association companies and with the Tipperary PPN, we all gathered under the one learning centre, which was Cultivate, coming out of Cloughjordan. And honestly, their approach was very good overall in the training that they provided. And it was very down to earth and spoke to communities up and down the country and has connected us in a way that we wouldn't have been connected before. So now we're, supporting and promoting what's happening down in South Tip and vice versa. So I just think it'd be great to build on things that already exist, as well as introduce this lovely collaboration with you and what you're building. So my question, I suppose, roundabout question, will there be that cross collaboration, that cross pollination moving forward? It makes sense to me not to keep reinventing the wheel as such.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Patricia. Really good point. I feel a lot of the time what we're doing is helping to connect the dots, because there's so many great activities and organizations and individuals, but they don't necessarily know of each other. And there's a great opportunity, like you said, for cross-fertilization here. So it would be great if you get in touch. I'd love to talk about it some more. I mean, for instance, there could be a great opportunity for some of these climate coaches to act as education facilitators or coaches within a program, or for us to kind of exchange ideas and grow both of what we're currently doing, because it sounds like there are good opportunities for synergy and complementarity there. So I'd love to hear some more.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I'll be in touch with my own groups very soon again. And the
Yes.
PPN is bringing us all back together, which is great. We've got more funding for that. So the idea would have been to roll this out to other PPNs in other counties. So
Yes.
absolutely, it's one thing leading into another. We're all going in the same direction. So it'd be great to join up the dots. Thanks so much.
Sounds great, Patricia. Thank you. Say hi to
Yes.
Patrick. He's graduating next week.
Oh, thanks for letting me know. I sure will. I haven't seen him in ages, so I'll link in
Okay.
with him. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
Quentin, there's a couple of people there just in the chat just asking, could you please share the email address again? So we might.
Yeah. Why don't I share the screen and
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Sure
And
thing.
another question there, when educating about biodiversity, did the pilot use any multi-species approaches? And if so, what methods did you use? And how did the facilitators and the participants find these approaches? Also, you mentioned participants all had a third level education. Is there an argument to be made to target participants without this level of formal education to diversify the knowledge being incorporated?
Yeah, they're two really good points. I'll take the second one first, maybe. It was unexpected because it was a pilot project. I'll just put up this slide with the email address as I'm talking. It was a pilot project and we didn't stipulate any particular educational level. So when the applications came in, we were surprised that all of the applicants had at least a bachelor's. A handful had, I think maybe like 5 or 6 had masters and 2 or 3 had PhDs. So that to me says that we didn't reach all parts of the community. And I don't know why. So I think we need to look at that in terms of recruitment, particularly as it was a pilot. If or when we run it again, it may be a level 8 or level 9 course, which would be like at a higher level, so kind of postgraduate level, or kind of senior bachelor's level, in which case it would limit the diversity in the groups in terms of educational backgrounds or levels. But yeah, I don't really have an answer for that. It came as a bit of a surprise, so I don't know. I would say though that a lot of the community engagement happened after the program. So for instance, the likes of the public library and the engagement through that was huge. And that really did involve and reach out to all parts of the community. So there is something to be said there for that. In relation to the multi-species question and biodiversity, I don't think that they really went into that level of detail because they weren't from that kind of environmental science or biodiversity, botany, zoology background. But we did invite in a few experts to discuss this, particularly around biodiversity action planning. So they did receive some content around that, but they were more thinking around how to increase awareness and appreciation of the local wetlands rather than kind of a deep dive into the biodiversity or species richness, I would say. Not to say that that wouldn't be a good thing to do, it's just for them, for that particular group, they didn't delve that deeply into it, I would say.
And just a further kind of question there, do you think the approach and methodology worked well because of the specific group of participants, background, largely engaged? And then there's just a comment there about, if you targeted other kind of groups like disadvantaged, etc. in the community, would that help overall?
Yeah, so diversity is really important in this. I mentioned that we're sector agnostic within IKC3. So the more diverse the group, the better, as far as we're concerned. We really want to get all of these opinions and perspectives. And if we're thinking, for instance, about planning for just transition, we really need to have these minority or marginalized groups involved as well. So it can be difficult to get them involved. And there are some good case studies and examples of this happening, particularly in the Midlands of Ireland, actually. So I think we can learn a lot from that. And the other part, I think, was around the approach. Did it work particularly well for this cohort? Well, it did work well for this cohort. However, we've also kind of piloted this in very different contexts with different learners. So I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, the tourists, summer schools. The first iteration was around master's level students around Europe. A later iteration in 23 was professionals, different regions of the country. So we've applied a systems thinking, challenge-based methodology to lots of different types of learners and different cohorts. It needs to be kind of contextualized. It's not kind of a one size fits all, but the methodology and approach is very adaptable, and I've seen it yield some really great results and build awareness, which is fantastic.
Thank you. I just maybe a further just question just for myself, in terms of your presentation. I think, or I'd be interested in kind of understanding a little bit more about, particularly for those that are here today, you know, are there some notable examples maybe of successful models of community-based sustainability education from other regions or even other countries that maybe particularly some of the local authorities or some of the other participants here today in terms of attendees could learn from if they were
Yeah.
to think forward with this idea?
That's a great question. And I think in a way, it comes back to definition of innovation. And innovation isn't necessarily creating something completely new, which, let's face it, is very difficult to do. Innovation can also be taking something someone else has thought of in a different context and kind of transposing that and adapting that for your local context. And there's some really nice examples of community-based projects in other countries. I can think of some examples, for instance, in Denmark around renewable energy and community-based wind farms and community-based energy. In Sweden and Norway with community-based district heating. You know, there are lots of examples, community-based agriculture co-ops in, you know, Spain and Italy. There are lots of different models from around the world that are successful. And although, you know, there could be aspects of their challenges which are unique to that area, there's generally something that's quite adaptable and we can translate into our own context. So we need, when we're thinking about, you know, making sense of systems and when we're ideating and generating ideas, it's really helpful to think about, well, who else is faced with a similar challenge and what have they done to kind of overcome that? Have they proposed solutions which might be adaptable and scalable and might work for us in our context? And that's a really useful exercise to do.